Today, we're going to dive into the story of a man who some people say was the greatest guitarist who ever lived. He was a legend in his own time, and then he just about vanished from history completely.
I want you to just think about this for a second. What if the Paganini of the guitar, a true revolutionary, ended his life forgotten and broke? Because for Agustín Barrios Mangoré, that's not some hypothetical. That is literally what happened.
And get this baffling quote comes from Andres Segovia. Now, if you don't know the name, Segovia wasn't just some guitarist. He was the undisputed king of the classical guitar in the 20th century. I mean, this is the guy who single-handedly put the instrument on the concert stage. His opinion could make or break you. And his statement just perfectly captures the whole puzzle of Barrios, a self-destructive genius.
This right here, this slide tells you everything you need to know. On the left, you've got this piece from 1908, showing him as this sensitive, very European-style artist. Then you fast forward just 25 years, and on the right, bam, he's Nitsugo Mangoré, an indigenous Guarani chief. The same guy, two totally different identities. So how in the world did we get from point A to point B?
To really get the myth, we have to start with the man. In a story, well, it doesn't begin in some remote jungle. It begins in a house that was full of books and music. So Barrios was born into a big, cultured family in a small town in southern Paraguay. His dad was an Argentine vice consul, and his mom was a schoolteacher. Their house had one of the biggest libraries in the entire region, which is a far cry from the exotic persona he'd later build for himself.
At first, he just learned guitar by playing folk tunes. But the real game changer was his mentor, Gustavo Sosa Escalada, who was a formerly trained classical guitarist. And for Barrios, it was a total revelation. In his own words, he discovered the marvelous possibilities hidden inside what he thought was just a simple folk instrument.
Well, Sosa Escalada saw the kid's talent right away, and pretty soon Barrios was off to the capital, Asunción, to study at the Colegio Nacional. This was the beginning of his formal education, and not just in music, but in everything from grammar to geography. It really set the stage for the kind of Renaissance man he would become.
Now, after his studies, you'd think Barrios would settle down into a nice, comfortable teaching job, right? Nope. Instead, he started a journey that would define his entire life, a true bohemian existence, just fueled by art and emotion.
And the thing is, he was so much more than just a guitarist. He was a voracious reader who could recite huge passages from memory. He was a poet, a really talented caricaturist, and a master calligrapher. But above all, he was this restless soul, always on the move, who ended up traveling across 19 different Latin American nations.
And you want to talk about passion? Okay, check out this incredible story from a friend of his. After being publicly snubbed by a young woman, Barrios went to her window that night, not to woo her, but to unleash this musical torrent. The guitar first insulted and ridiculed her with this frightening dissonant music, and then, just as suddenly, it shifted to this beautiful melody of forgiveness. I mean, who does that? That's the kind of raw emotion he was channeling.
But he was famously reluctant to actually write his music down on paper. He was a man of the moment, an improviser. His patron in Uruguay was so terrified these masterpieces would be lost that he supposedly locked Barrios in a room and refused to let him out until he had finished writing down his compositions. Honestly, thank goodness he did.
So by the 1930s, Barrios was a well-respected artist, but he wasn't a global superstar. And that's when he made the most audacious, and maybe the most telling, move of his whole career.
The classical music world, let's be honest, has always been pretty Eurocentric. So if you're an artist from Paraguay, how are you supposed to compete with the European masters? Well, you don't play their game. You create a whole new one.
And this is what he did. He stopped being Agustín Barrios and became Nitsugo Mangoré, the Guarani Indian chief, the Paganini of the guitar from the jungles of Paraguay. He would walk on stage in full indigenous regalia and tell these mystical stories. Was it brilliant marketing, or was it a desperate search for an identity that would finally get him noticed? It was probably both.
And the name he chose was deeply symbolic. Chief Mangoré was a real historical figure, a Guarani leader who resisted the Spanish conquest. By taking his name and spelling his own name, Agustín, backwards to get Nitsuga, Barrios was making this powerful statement about his identity and his music's roots.
But this wasn't just a costume. It was a persona he completely lived in. He wrote this Profession of Faith, a poetic origin story where the supreme Guarani spirit, Tupá, gives him the guitar, and the moon goddess gives him 6 silver moonbeams, the strings, to unlock its secrets. He was literally creating his own legend.
This new persona brought him a lot of fame across Latin America. But his ultimate legacy? That rests on his compositions and a series of tragic near misses that just raise all these unsettling questions.
To really understand his genius, you have to understand his most famous work, La Cathédrale. It tells a story in two parts. The first movement captures the solemn, spiritual sound of a Bach organ piece that he heard inside a grand cathedral. The second movement is the chaotic sound of the bustling street he steps into afterwards. It's this fusion of European structure with raw South American emotion that made his music so revolutionary. You can literally hear the world rushing in.
Right around the time he composed it, Barrios met Andrés Segovia. He played his compositions for the maestro, who was reportedly floored and promised to perform them. Now that promise, from the most powerful man in the guitar world, that was a ticket to immortality. But Segovia never played a single note of Barrios' music in concert, not once. Was it professional jealousy? Snobbery towards a jungle artist? Or did he just forget? We'll never know, but the result was the same. A door to worldwide fame was slammed shut.
And from there, it was just this devastating cascade of bad luck. He finally makes it to Europe, but never gives a public concert in Berlin. The Spanish Civil War erupts just as he's getting a foothold. A massive heart attack cripples his playing. And by 1944, he's dead in El Salvador, an ocean away from home, and virtually unknown outside of Latin America.
The most haunting part is that he almost seemed to know his fate. 22 years before he died, he wrote a poem ending with this line. It's just a chillingly accurate prophecy of his own end. So why do we know him at all? This artistic, introspective photo was taken in Europe, a world away from where his legacy was truly preserved, and it wasn't in concert halls. It was in the hands of loyal friends for whom he painstakingly wrote down his music. For decades, those manuscripts were scattered. It took a new generation of guitarists to piece his life's work back together, rescuing him from total oblivion. Which brings us back to that quote from Segovia. Was Barrios a self-destructive artist who sabotaged his own fame? Or was he a man so fiercely original, the bohemian, the poet, the indigenous chief, that he simply couldn't or wouldn't play by the rules of a world that just wasn't ready for him? That's the question his incredible story leaves us with.